bit jittery today, so apologies about that. It must be the Cornish weather, I'm putting it, or inferior technology, and even worse, technical skills on my part, perhaps. But anyway, welcome. How are you all? We're live. Let's get some comments up. Let's see. We've got a good one today, especially for those who are, and to be honest, a promotion in anything. I think this is going to be a useful tool for getting a lot of really good information from the experts themselves. Steve Cooper, I've known him for many years when he was in the police, in Devon and Cornwall Police, the same one as myself. He went on the CID side of things. I went for the traffic and the armed response side of things. One of those where you always, for many, many years, you cross each other in the canteens and things. He did rather better than me in ranks and things. So he actually runs, he started Rank Success, his company called ranksuccess.co.uk, for helping those people to help their way and gain success on the promotion ladder. And you might ask yourself, well, is it fair? Should we do this? I thought about this when my daughter was going for the 11 plus, and she had to do special tutoring to stand even a chance. Is this the right way to do it, or does it actually build you some people skills some skills that you could use for anything anyway? And it just improves the way you put things across and things like that. So that's going to be really useful, really good for anything in walks of life. I managed to get to the dizzy heights of sergeant. And people say, I remember occasionally some people say, oh, well, how high is sergeant? That seems quite high, doesn't it? I said, well, I did PC sergeant. And then there is inspector, chief inspector, superintendent, chief superintendent, assistant chief constable, deputy chief constable, chief constable. So I jumped off that conveyor belt nice and early. And it gave me a sense of freedom because I realized I probably wouldn't have been any good at it anyway. I knew my limits and I knew I'd be pretty good on the front line. I wanted to get cold and wet occasionally. I wanted to have a little gang of people that we could do stuff with, really on the grassroots, and help those people on the front line. And that's really what I had. I wasn't really academic, I have to admit. Although Ollie Taylor, who was inspector, he is inspector, I did remind him that I passed my sergeant's exam first time, and he took a few goes. But anyway, he's a very good friend of mine, lovely man. Right. Incidentally, more police officers leaving the police, joining as a train driver. Ironically, I heard a story of somebody joining Great Western, the Great Western Railway train people, and from the police, his wages immediately doubled, and then they immediately went on strike for lack of money. What's going on? I keep breaking up. Okay, sorry, Stephanie. Can anyone just remind me? I think there's a bit of a Wi-Fi thing in Newquay at the moment because I keep testing it. It says it's all right. So apologies if it is a little bit like that. I've shut down all the stuff and rebooted it. But this is as good as we're going to get, I'm afraid. We've had certain things like, let's just bring this on a minute. I just wanted to touch base with what's been going on in Twitter recently. It's interesting, isn't it? It's a good point from AFOs. Teens, when they beat a retired police officer to an inch of his life, but children, when they are being searched or receive any police use of force. It's an important thing to note, isn't it? It's how the media describe things. This was a horrendous situation where a retired police officer was assisting somebody else who needed some help, rather than walking by. Once a cop, always a cop. He got a beating, a really horrendous beating. I think it's life-changing. So awful. So yeah, I mean, I'll just go on to the more. There's my brother Charlie, came from France, all the way from France. Me with my very long hair, which I've since groomed. And let's see what else we got. She kept stopping a vehicle robustly that has failed to stop for 5 minutes. These people need to. Okay, let's go on. Basically, clue is everyone out there, and it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter who you are, what area you're in. If you are pulled over by the police, you stop immediately. You speak politely to the police officers and you'll be amazed at the reply, the response from these officers. You'll be amazed if you speak politely to them. And any grievances you have, you take up afterwards, because there was a robust complaints procedure afterwards, which you can involve. So that's how to do it. The thing not to do is to drive off and pretend they're not there for 5 minutes. Although, depending on certain circumstances, the media will be on your side and won't ask those awkward questions like, why didn't you stop? Right, this man here, arrested, horrible man, on remand, charged. That's good for that. I mean, this is where we are in this world. It is because it's publicized more. It is publicized more. I get it. You got these horrible crimes in the years gone by. You always did. There was always some sick, horrible person who did something horrendous. But so it's difficult. I always try to sift what is actually true and what just seems to be true. Yeah, Vernal Scott, he's a top man here. Really, we had him on Frontline Chat. He's diversity officer for Sussex. I'm going to risk clicking on him because the Wi-Fi is going to hurt. And he's a top man, really balanced, right? Yes, he's gay. Yes, he's black. Yes, he works for the police. And yes, he is the most balanced. And if the police have messed up, he will say the police have messed up. If he thinks, no, the media are really getting the wrong end of this, then he will support the police. And quite right. He's an absolute top geezer, and I recommend you follow him. Yeah, Wi-Fi is rubbish, so apologies for that. Rose, this is what men are known for. She's just asked, Harry, have you had a haircut? All right, men are not notoriously known for noticing when someone's had a haircut, and they always get. So I find it's always best to just save my blushes, and just every time I go into the office, is ask, oh, if you had a haircut. I'm going to wait for that one. Okay. Hi, Harry. The police forces across the entire planet is coming to an end very soon. There will be no police at all. Well, I think that's probably a bit drastic, but there are we could definitely see the mood changes going on, and there are police officers, experienced police officers that we relied on so much as young officers to guide us along the way, and they're going. And so it is a frightening thing. It is a frightening thing that you are left with, and I think they're being set up to fail. Young, inexperienced officers. And I'm going to ask Steve, as he comes on, because he was in the Royal Marines, and I have the utmost respect for the Royal Marines because it's a tough old course and it's a tough old selection. So if you've done that, you're half decent already, without a shadow of a doubt. So impressive stuff. But Devon and Cornwall, it was very well known that a lot of our selection was from former Royal Marines, former services personnel. We had Lympstone here. We've got Plymouth Naval Base. We've got we did. Yeah, that's it. That's enough in it, really. We had Chivener up in North Devon, of course. So a lot of just experienced, mature, disciplined people to select from, and I think it really, really helps policing if that's done like that. I'm not going to share the screen. I'm just going to go through other stuff at the moment because. Oh yeah, there was one. I'm not going to play it, but because it will just bung everything up. But there was a guy in a car in America that got pepper sprayed. He came out and he started larging it up to these people, just doing. I mean, they've got a proper camera and a proper sound thing, and he started larging up. And they pepper sprayed him in the face. It's a Section 5 firearm. Here you can't use it, although my brother in France says they are legal in France. Or if they're not, they're liberally available. But the problem is do we then get where they're used more inappropriately than they are appropriately? There is Sean Sawyer. I've got to say, he was my top cover. He just knew what I was trying to achieve by going. He was my chief constable, who's retired from the Devon and Cornwall Police after over 10 years. He was a phenomenal man. even though he started off his days in the Met. I jest, okay, I jest, but he was an absolute top guy and a real people person. And I generally didn't hear a bad word about him. I wish him well, and whatever he does, good if he went for commissioner, but I wouldn't wish it on the man. Do you know what I mean? Who would? It's just, I need to mention as well, thank you very much. Sadiq Khan is making the press a lot, saying how terrible the knife crime and murders are in London and it must stop immediately. So that's perhaps if you started supporting the police a little bit, that might be good. Instead of jumping on the nearest bandwagon. Right, we'll move on, shall we? I got to get off my soapbox here. And thank you, Plymouth University, for the professional policing degree. Now, there's lots of criticism about the different degree methods, and I have been a major critic of it. The good thing about the professional policing degree is if you do the policing degree before, it's basically you do it in your own time, your own money, and your whatever, and you do this, and you think, well, why would you do that? Well, it's a phenomenal degree which sets you up for life as well, because you can use it in everything. It really helps you teaches you about leadership, about the law, about that side of things, but also about teamwork and crisis management, that sort of thing. It's sticking you into it a bit. And before they, Brendan Brookshaw is a very good man, because he wanted something that to introduce them when they started the course, they wanted a bit of a flavour of what it's actually like out there. So Ollie Taylor, an inspector, was Rose Policing. Now he's a SIM, so he basically runs Torbay Policing at the moment. We're going to be giving a chat to these students as well, just to give a flavour of how we dealt with what they should expect. Yeah, it's going to be harsh, it's going to be difficult, but I don't want to just give that message. It's, as Steve will also agree, you're given an awful lot of support in the police as well. It's a bit cheesy, but it's a family as well. And they don't just say, oh, fatal road traffic collision, off you go and deal with that. Let's see what you're made of. But so obviously you might have known I made that one, and 100 of those are going to students on the professional policing course in Plymouth Uni to give a flavour. It's the human side of policing. It's the stories that came up when we were talking amongst colleagues. We said, do you remember that? Oh, that was horrendous situation. But it also shows the compassion within policing as well, which is just so important. And all the other bits that I didn't put in there, I made a novel out of it. So they're all true, basically. All the bits in there are pretty true, based on true crime events witnessed by a former police sergeant. And I'm 70,000 words into part 2 of that one. See some of the comments. I was very disappointed that there's very little abuse going on here. I never get any of those abusive people, that you get on Twitter. Twitter is just, come on, guys, show some abuse. No, all right, I'm joking, all right. Being put out and asking whether you know. The other thing, have you noticed as well when people are stopped and they said, well, they only stopped him for suspicion of a mobile phone? Let's talk about a generic situation. Suspicion of using a mobile phone. I think, I've often put on Twitter that we can't just stop compliant people. If people run off because you think, actually, are they on their mobile phone? I'm going to have a word with them. And you can legally, lawfully stop them. And I won't bore you with all the Road Traffic Act and that side of things, but you can legally, lawfully stop them. And you have a bit of a chat with them. And it's 9 times out of 10, 90 times out of 100. Some would say that's the same thing. Is you get no problem, you have a nice little chat, thank you very much, off you go. I would never stop someone unless I was 100% just to save the stuff, just to save the trouble and the argument and all that side of things. Or I know I'm already going to just warn them because of certain circumstances. But most of the time I did prosecute, certainly for mobile phones and for seatbelts, because, 16:15, let's press on. 45 minutes. Rambling on. Let's get Steve Cooper coming in here, coming to join us. Basically, he's a phenomenal chap. I want him here because it's in the press a lot. It's in the talking on Twitter about. It's all about recruitment, of course, but also promotion. Myself, I was bleating on about the promotion process here. Let's ask Steve, who was a former Royal Marine, police inspector, very much CID through and through, and he actually introduced basically was the bolts, the nuts and bolts on the ground to introduce the decision model, national decision model, into policing in Devon and Cornwall, which was one of the most brilliant systems. It gave police officers on the front line that practical support to make decisions without fearing the repercussions of it. So we're going to talk about that. Let's bring him on. Steve Cooper. Let's see if our Wi-Fi can cope with you as well, shall we? Here we go.
Hi, Harry. Afternoon. Thanks for having me on.
How are you?
I'm fine,
thank you.
Never had a build-up like that on a Saturday afternoon.
Well, I wholly have respected you through my career. I never was fortunate, unless you're going to tell me otherwise, to work with you directly. But we were very close, weren't we? We were all in sort of East Devon, and were you mainly around that area? And then headquarters, we would have probably shared a cappuccino across the canteen from each other a couple of times, I would imagine.
Yeah, I've been all over the place in Devon and Cornwall, but you probably would have passed me on the road somewhere while I was on the roads to A&B. So, yeah, we've passed, and we've definitely had a couple of coffees in the canteen over the years. So.
And did you start, am I right, and you started in Torbay initially?
I did my probation at Honiton in East Devon, and then got posted to Torbay. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I really enjoyed everywhere I went, really, but the dark side called me, CID, and I eventually kind of went through that path, as you alluded to, and had a great time. So.
See, I was always feeling there was something wrong with me, because when I was in singles quarters in Torbay, everyone wanted to join CID, and I did not want to join CID, and I thought, what's going on? I fancied the fast cars, and didn't even think I would get into the guns side of things, but it tended to be that way, didn't you think? Are you either traffic or CID side of things? It was always a healthy.
I think it's really interesting, Harry, that we're two retired officers, and we're talking about how it used to be at Torquay, because in those days times were different. I joined, I think, just after Life on Mars. There were no computers, there were no mobile phones. The intelligence we looked at was 2 weeks old on a pink chit on the wall. So things have kind of moved on quite a bit. But in terms of what we're going to talk about today, maybe two sides of a coin, it's the same, or maybe it's changed a lot. I'll let the viewers and listeners decide to that.
Yeah, so your career, as you've alluded to, was very much CID side of things, and though you were very leading different projects, including, and before we go into the promotion thing, a really responsible side of things was you training L&D, of course. You brought in the NDM, but also multi-agents team lead, working with prolific and priority offenders. So basically, where we've got safeguarding, where someone's constantly a victim because they're going with the wrong people all the time, they don't feel as though they've got the methods, abilities, or finance to leave that situation, and safeguarding is to break that cycle. What you did was very much on the offenders side of thing, wasn't it? Is that the best described like that?
Yeah, very much. It's about targeting, managing, and supporting repeat offenders, trying to prevent crime, and working through what they call the integrated offender management principles to try and make that happen. So very much a partnership approach with probation and other agencies and police to manage offenders around their scoring in terms of their offending. So if they're red, they're active, then they're targeted by operational policing. And if they're on the kind of path to improvement and they need some support, some encouragement, some resources, they got that support as well. And the real success stories, which is what everybody was in that for, was to try and help people change their lives from offending and their history through to joining society and being responsible and getting employment. So it's a time I really enjoyed. There's a fantastic IOM team working across Devon and Cornwall and across the country, really. And it's often unseen work, but it's very much managed as a partnership approach to try and target those repeat or prolific offenders. And for those that are, if you like, changeable, if you like, we can turn them around. It's not so much a Damascene conversion, but to try and help them onto their a better life.
And that's just so important, because I think people think that the cops just go in there to arrest people, having that multi-agency approach stops people batting the problem off from one department or one agency to another. When you're actually looking singly at the same problem, it's so much more powerful to be able to say, okay, well, we can do this for them. Housing, we can do this, we can, or whatever, or we can get them for their assistance with their drug addiction with that, or so on. So, and I often remember being a police car, talking to someone who I regularly knew and going, oh, for God's sakes, why have you done this again? And they're like, I know, I just can't, you know, and you just know they need a bit of assistance. They're not horrible, nasty, evil people. It's just they've been brought up in a situation where they felt, well, there's no other option. I've got to, if you're in the wrong gang, it's very difficult to step out of that and look at it from the outside sensibly. And some people struggle to do that, don't they?
Yeah, and it's very much about going and delivering interventions at whatever point they are in their life, whether they're enforcement, protection, education, you know, and just giving them that meaningful support at the time of their lives where they're perhaps receptive to it and haven't been before. Right. So let's go on to the promotion. You've left the police now, and you set up this business called Rank Success. And was there a specific reason why you started that? And you know, and if you can explain roughly what the current promotion system is at the moment. How would I like? So I'm a sergeant. I want to be an inspector. What's the process, and how long does it take, sort of thing? And what do I need to think about? Okay, so for me, I was as a DI, I think about 2011, 2012, I was, as many DIs are, supporting officers with their promotion aspirations and whatever those promotion processes look like. So perhaps a promotion application to be considered for promotion, and then an interview or an assessment centre or a presentation or a briefing as part of the process. I was recognising quite early on and quite consistently that, you know, good cops, good operational cops, no matter whether from CID or any other branch, were making the same mistakes. So what I mean by that is forces will announce a promotion process and everybody, it's a bit like a Benny Hill mad dash. Everybody runs around, what's this all about? How can I be considered for this? Well, surely I must be at the front of the queue because I've been doing some acting or temporary experience. So doesn't that put me at the front of the queue? What's all this application business about? Who can help me? And for me, as a constable and as a sergeant, I'd been there before. And I knew that there was very little help available. And if you were lucky enough to have an inspector or a colleague somewhere who was like Yoda on Star Wars, who you could go to for advice or guidance or support or assistance, or they knew somebody who had just been through the process, then you were very lucky. Now, I do know some people who went to journalists to get media training, to get support and advice. So people literally went to do things like that to get on through, and the individual I'm thinking about got on quite through the senior ranks, but had difficulty taking off from constable level to get onto the rank ladder. So to come back to the processes at the moment, there is something called the National Police Promotion Framework, and that consists with people making it known that they want to be promoted. They then sit the exam, the law exam, whether that's for constable or sergeant, or in Police Scotland, if I'm going up to Police Scotland, they do a leadership qualification, so they don't do an exam. So very much a CPD-based approach. And then it's a case of postcode lottery. And it literally is, and I've written a blog about that. There's lots of blogs on my site that, you know, cops who are going for promotion might find interesting. And one of those is called the postcode lottery. And the reason I called it that is because different forces have different promotion processes at different times for different ranks. And a lot of cops don't understand that from their own force. So part of the encouragement that I offer is to help them look at through downloadable guides, through one-to-one support, through YouTube videos, through blogs, and through podcasts. I just provide some food for thought for them to think about and just to support and challenge and to respectfully provoke their thinking around their decision or their aspiration or intention to go for promotion. Because some people then say, hey, it's not for me. And at least that's an informed decision. And others go, wow. And they're a bit like Pac-Man going along picking it all up, which is why I put the information out there.
So we'll just add this too. This is what you offer for yourself, if I can bring it up actually. And you supply an awful lot of free information. And why do you do that exactly?
Well, that's a good question, because I get lots and lots of phone calls, I get lots and lots of emails, and most people are at the starting point or don't know where they are. They're literally disorientated in relation to the process. And one of the kind of pieces of advice that or suggestions I would make to officers thinking about going for promotion, whatever they are, and whichever process or rank they're going for, is start now. Now, that's never going to happen because people simply don't do it. But hopefully, after something like this and having the chance to think it through and reflect on it, they might do that, because those are the two words I would always encourage people: start now, and then have a look at the free guidance that's on my site, which includes, as I just alluded to, podcasts. There's a load of podcasts. There are blogs. There are YouTube videos on my YouTube channel. And the reason I put those out is, one, people can go and have a look at it and make their own decision as to whether they want to move along that chart to, the Great Valley or the full Monty, as I call it, and they can make an informed decision as to what they want to do in their own interest. And also, people learn differently. They approach promotion differently. People learn by listening, by watching, by reading, or an amalgamation of those things. So that's why I put that out there, and it's pretty comprehensive. And as we've literally just been talking, something just popped up on my phone from someone, and I haven't made this up. This is literally a scoop of the person. Someone's just sent me a message just now from the PC to Sergeant material. What I found incredibly useful. So this is someone who's telling me they just passed their sergeant's board. What I found incredibly useful was your free material. It's extremely vast, and I used your 80-odd YouTube videos and podcasts to consolidate my own knowledge, experience, and learning on the job. I'm pleased to say I genuinely enjoyed my board, and I embraced the opportunity. Now, you don't hear that very often, that people enjoy their board.
No, you don't. No, I enjoyed my second board. I hated my first board. And the good thing about the free stuff that I can see, and first of all, for everyone there, I'm not on any percentage or anything like that. This is literally because I genuinely think it's really useful stuff. And yes, there's other people that do similar, but they're not as good. And so anyway, the free stuff gives you sort of a place to start. I said, where do I start? Oh, do I just get my head to the books and then it's just potluck? Because I always think it's really potluck. The experiences I've had of watching people on the board, incredibly respected officers going there with a breadth of experience, proven records, and yet they say, unfortunately, it's down to 4 people on a board that you've got to convince in 40 minutes about a scenario that they give you, and your experience and knowledge has got absolutely nothing to do with it. And so there's a certain type of person who's very good at being able to cope with that. And there's a lot of brilliant leaders who I felt just that wasn't happening too. I just wanted to ask really then, Steve, is the promotion system we've got at the moment, does it actually work, or are you supplying information and skills to actually work it? A little bit like my daughter, who did an A star in A level, but struggles to speak French in Paris, where she's been an intern, but she's brilliant at knowing how to pass an exam because that's what their school teaches them, to pass the exam. Is it a similar thing, or actually you learning, or isn't it anything like that?
Well, they're all good questions, Harry. And I think for me, for my approach is I provide the information out there for free. If people want to move along a little bit and download a digital toolkit, which is something essentially that I wish I had when I went for promotion. I wish someone had written that digital toolkit for sergeant or inspector or chief inspector for me, because what I've tried to do is encapsulate all the things that worked for me. So I passed my inspector's board first time, but I didn't have a clue what I was doing when I was going for sergeant. And I think I went for 2 or maybe 3 boards and passed on my 3rd board. So I didn't want that to happen again, and I wanted to pass first time. So the information I provide, as that individual suggested, is kind of vast. And it allows for people to enter wherever they are. So some people, as you said, and as we've just alluded to, have been for 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, some people have been through a dozen promotion processes before they suddenly wake up and smell the coffee when they've read a guide and go, I never did any of that. I never said any of that. I never made any of those links. And so what I try to do as a coach is I like to start with people wherever they are. And sometimes they will come to me and say, hey, I've bought your digital toolkit. Brilliant. I've got it all in my head now. I now need to work on some conversational kind of mock board stuff, or I want you to test me, Steve. I want you to ask me some questions that the kind of which I'm going to get. So that's a great way of preparing. And you don't need me to do that. You can get a friend, a relative, a loved one to do that with you, because the questions are in my toolkit, 6 at a time, 45 minutes, bit of role play, and see how you feel. Now, your relatives are not there to mark the quality of what you're saying, but you are there to test yourself and say, are these links happening in my head? Do I know what the challenges facing policing are at the moment? Because some of the car crashes, if you like to use the metaphor, in interviews are around people being asked stunningly simple, basic questions that could have reasonably been foreseen. And yes, there's 4 people there to ask it within a framework. And it might be something about, would you please describe your understanding of the role of a sergeant or the role of an inspector, or the difference between a role of a sergeant or inspector? And boom, first question, they want the floor to open up and swallow them. And yet,
and interrupting on that, that was a question on my sergeants. And the second time I did it, I realized I learned all the skills and competencies of the sergeant. And you sort of say, well, I think it's important. And I said it as naturally as I possibly could, but ding, 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 ding. I could see them going, ding, 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 ding. That gave me the confidence. So carry on. But that's a brilliant example.
Yeah, and so that's the kind of thing. So what I do with the free materials is just to start putting those kind of building blocks, that orientation in place for people. So whether they want to look at a particular YouTube video that I've done, and I do them in my conservatory, like you're doing, just at home, on some thoughts that come into my head, or on specific competencies, so that they can introduce themselves to the competency. And here's someone for the first time bringing it to life and giving an example of what that might look or sound like. And that is absolute dynamite for people when they go for a board, because they've heard it before. Their brain goes in and they sit in a board and go, hey, I've been here before, rather than what's this all about? And that's just about your confidence.
And not to look at it as if it didn't happen, it didn't mean that you were bad. It means that someone was better on the day. And I have found, if ever, I've been the chief at doing things twice. I've been the best failure in the world, I tell you. But and that's what I try to tell people in the book as well. When you get new recruits, I speak to a lot of recruits, a lot of people who joining the ARVs. And I remember the time when the ARVs, the firearms units, drove out a Torquay Nick to go to a post office robbery. And I saw them with the MP5s, John Gingell and all that sort of. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing, amazing. They must be the elite and all that. Then I realized how hard they worked to get there. And then they and to fail the first promotion exam I did. And then I get it now. And it taught me so much. I went in the second time and I enjoyed it. And it was like, come on then, ask me the next one. Because I sort of knew the questions that they were going to ask. There's only so many in the basket. And the other thing I did was, because there was a bit of a thing against traffic, the first time I failed, I immediately left. I got my results that I'd failed. And then they said, could you be temporary for a year on the traffic department? And I hear this even now, and people saying, well, this is ridiculous. If I'm not good enough, why are they asking me to? Well, obviously, I wasn't going to argue, and I did it. But when I went into my interview the second time around, I didn't even mention traffic because I knew. So they'd say, well, what would you do in this scenario? And I said, well, if I was a neighbourhood beat officer, beat sergeant in Brixham, for example, I would do this, because they wanted to know that you weren't pigeonholed. And that's something I heard. It's learning tricks like that are so important as well, don't you think? And that's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly around the bespoke and tailored support that people need, because they come in differently. So often I get sergeants who are really experienced operational sergeants, tremendous, they've been deputy SIOs on murder investigations, but it isn't about your job. It isn't about your best job. That's not what they want to hear about. They want to see very much about you, how you think, how you make decisions, how informed you are, what work you've put into this interview, this fantastic competitive opportunity amongst your peers. And as you alluded to, good, better, and best are themes with candidates. You can come in and have a good interview, but and some can be better, but they'll generally try and select the best. And whether that's right or wrong, forces need to select leaders, they need to recruit recruits, and there needs to be this turnover. And do they get it right every year? I don't think so. Do they get it right most of the time? Probably. But just going back to when, perhaps our recollections, it was unusual for people to get promoted with less than 5 years in, 10 probably sometimes to get to sergeant, and you knew you were getting an experience-rounded individual. And it's not about time served, but it is about, how much have you applied yourself to CPD? So CPD is a massive theme. And whenever I sit down with officers and say, could you just talk to me about CPD? Continuous professional development or continuous personal development. And that was the number one recommendation of the College of Policing's leadership review some years ago, that all leaders take responsibility for their own development so far as they can, owning their own career and driving their own career so far as they can, and the organisation will meet you halfway. So it's really interesting that when we talk about this, and it's such a big topic, that when sergeants come in, and lots of different sergeants come in, they often fail at inspector because they haven't switched on the strategic thinking switch. So I've done a few blogs about that, because what does that mean? What does working more strategically mean? How do you do that? When have you done that? Talk us through it. And so lots of sergeants kind of don't do that as part of their preparation. So
no, there's quite a transition, isn't there, from being very much hands-on as a sergeant, which I was. I loved it. I've got a sort of a section of misfits. The strongest section.
Yeah. I enjoyed sergeant rank as well. I enjoyed sergeant rank probably the most if I look back.
Yeah, I often hear that. I do often hear that, and I was just so glad that I didn't do what was expected of you, even, especially if you sort of got yourself known a little bit, and people would say, "Oh, when you're going for your promotion, think of your pension," sort of thing. Well, Ian Adams asked a very good question here. He's a top man himself. He's yesterday, our Chief Constable, Sean Sawyer, retired. Should the new Chief Constable for Devon and Cornwall be appointed from within? Do you think this, because this is something that changed, didn't it? Where you had to come in from outside. I felt it was fresh blood, new ideas. I think it was quite useful. Do you think it will be a bit stale being promoted from within, do you think, with the top job in each force?
Well, of course, I shall have absolutely zero influence on that decision, Harry. But being as you ask, I think there's an argument on both sides with that, because I know that historically, when they've promoted senior officers, some of the criteria has been that you have to move forces, you have to have served in another force as part of your development. Personally, I wouldn't have an objection myself. If somebody knows a particular force, they will have already engaged with lots of different chief constables and MPCC and superintendents associations. They're going to know all the people, or many of the players on the committees, on the work groups, on the portfolios. So I wouldn't want to kind of push that point on its own alone. But I would have no objections one way or the other, so long as it's a right candidate and they pass the process. So.
Then going on from that, do you think, because I think especially if the word diversity comes in, I think people confuse diversity, with positive discrimination. If that comes in, that can be extremely damaging, and it very much alienates. Often I get, if you're a middle-aged white male, you're going to feel very dejected if you're given encouraging support and advice, free advice, if you're female or a black minority, then and I think that interferes. Whereas for me, diversity is that you are looked upon with your individual skills equally, whoever you are and whatever race you are, whatever sex you are, whatever. Now, but going on that, do you think with the current system as it is, you could a poor leader or manager could still get promoted now? Or do you think there's enough safeguards to actually find that out? Can they talk a good talk?
Absolutely, people can talk. So competencies or behaviours, as I like to call them, technically that's incorrect, but practically it works. The competencies are there, and competencies are how organisations want people to behave. So the competency and values framework that's used to assess promotion candidates is very much values based. So it's very much around shared values and particular values in policing. So there's 4 on the competency and values framework. And each of those competencies are assessed at different points, at different tests. So through assessment centres, presentations, briefings, or interviews. So there's lots of scope there to ensure they get the right candidate, however that process is put in place. But is it possible for a leader to get through that and be poor? Well, I think first and foremost, I'd want to think about what we mean by poor leadership. Because often when I ask candidates, what's a good leader? What's your understanding of what a good leader is? Well, talk about yourself as a leader. There is a massive gap. So they might already be acting.
Yeah.
They might already be the most experienced operational cop, well liked, well respected by their team. But I say to them, tell us what your understanding is of a great leader or a good leader. What do you aspire to? What's it like to be led by you? And that's an uncomfortable conversation for people. And yet that's a skill that if you can develop that in your privacy of your own home as part of a preparation for a board, it merges and melds with all your experience and just helps you have insights into who you are. And I think so in terms of poor leadership, I think there's lots of good leaders with gaps. And what I try and do through my materials, my one-to-one support, is to help them fill their gaps. Now, there's lots of other ways they can do that. I'm just one source on the planet. But this CPD journey, this leadership development journey, is something I'll often start with people. So whether it's diversity, and I wrote 3 blogs on my site around diversity, equality and inclusion in policing at the moment, because in some forces, as you've just kind of pointed out, it is really serious in policing and it's taken really importantly. So in Kent, I think it is, promotion candidates will have a half an hour pre-interview board before their main promotion interview board. So they've added the board up to an hour and a half, just so that they can look at whether a candidate understands these issues that you're alluding to. And therefore, I don't think it matters who that candidate is, no matter what colour, sexuality, gender, it doesn't matter. If they're going for promotion, then they can respond. Leadership after that point, when you're promoted, is about essentially development from that point on. So yes, younger officers can come in, can get promoted and be poor, but with the right support, they can develop as great leaders, and many do. Just conversely, there are many elder officers or really more experienced officers who don't push themselves through the development path and therefore don't grow and learn and develop.
Right. Okay. And this one's just come up on its own because Ian, I'm glad it's not abusive. You wouldn't get anything abusive. Ian, are you coming around my house today? I don't know where you are, part of the world. You were going to come around for a cup of coffee. Ian Abdams was. He's a top man. He's been great support over the last year as well. What's he say? The right person should always be appointed based on their behaviour, knowledge, leadership, shadow results. Right. But I also think that different leader is I sort of see it as the glue for people who I wanted a section with very much different people in it. All right, I didn't want I often joke there was one super cop who I thought, I'd clone him any day, you know. And people say, who's your favourite amongst the section? I used to break all the rules. I said, well, clearly it's him, and I'd give him my McDonald's token. But it made a thing of every week. It was like, all right, who's the sergeant's favourite this week? And I'd be like that with a McDonald's token. Seriously, whole 6 guys of armed response. And but it was just to acknowledge, and it also just acknowledged somebody who just put themselves out where it wasn't just necessarily the best job, but they did a favor for me. And it was really, it's a ridiculous thing, but they quite enjoyed it. Now, that leader was, I definitely had a unique way, I think, that probably wouldn't pass too many observations, but that leader is very different from somebody you need in an office to run things from behind the scenes, so that I get the material I need, so that I can put it in front of my guys and girls and we can do the best job. And they don't have to be brilliant motivators back there, do they, Steve? So it's not necessary they have to be fantastic motivators on each one.
No, they don't. And this very word that we're talking about, leadership, which is a value, um, that in some of the guidance I give out, I mean, I talk about and raise the questions, have you decided to become a leader? Because people who go for the promotion exam and put themselves forward for a promotion selection process and the challenging process that that can often be, um, they made a decision somewhere along the line. Somewhere that thought came into their head. I think I've got what it takes to lead other people. And that's where the journey starts. But that's talking, that's thinking. The only thing that gets you promoted is taking action. But the topic of leadership is really, really important. So some of the questions I'll ask them is, what are my values? Or how are your values? Because that generally stops people in their tracks for about an hour while they just go and visit that theme. And yet it's a values
Yeah,
framework that you're going to be assessed on. What do I really believe in? And what line will I not cross? So that's an important question. What's really
yeah,
important to me? How do I relate to other people? What is my impact? What method best helps me learn? And how do I handle stress? So these are some of the kind of initial questions I will ask people. And then we'll have a look and an understanding and say, okay, where are we now? Okay, fine. Let's have a look at something. So leadership has been around for 3,000 years. There's 150 years of academic study, and still there's a lack of agreement on what it is. So for me, I always try and
yeah,
shrink it down into context, which is important. So 21st century policing, different to life on Mars, 20th century kind of policing, but and different to generations before that. And yet the quotes by people like Sir Robert Mark, policing is the anvil upon which society beats out its problems, frustrations, and weak legislation. It still stands the test of time. And I used to write that in my day books as a DI. Every time I got a new day book, I would put that in. And the other thing is, tests ain't fair. People that practice and rehearse for them generally do better. So there's an element there. But just on the leadership development, when we stop and say, okay, you can now talk about yourself for a leader or can't, about as a leader for 5 minutes. Let's have a look at this theme, this topic of leadership. So I'll give them something like Peter Drucker's playbook for the public sector, which is
yeah.
leadership at the heart of it, one word, and then you're talking about vision. Let's talk about vision. Where has policing come from? Where is it now? Where is it going to? What's your force vision? And how are you going to make that meaningful for the people you lead? So if you work for Nike in the 1960s, their mission was crush Adidas. Everybody knew it. Now, how do you make
Yeah,
that pizzazzy and zappy like that for policing, building safer
yeah.
communities together, or fighting crime, protecting people? But it's got to kind
So
of go down to the
how on
thinking.
earth? God, I mean, because you go into an interview room now, the way policing is at the moment, and yes, it's always been in turmoil. And I've read a book that is like 40 years old from a police officer who was talking about his previous 20 years in policing in London. He was, and the same problems. He was moaning about the media treating them unfairly. He was moaning about too many protests in London. He was moaning about basically the abuse they get as police officers, and we all assume there was utmost respect. But I was also speaking to a very good friend of mine who's moved to Canada and he's been there all his life, and he said, "Unbelievable what your cops have to put up with. You'd be locked up, cuffed, and guess what? The cops have. Yes, been a few protest things because you always get those many, but generally the cops are given much respect because there's discipline, and you don't walk up to a cop and give him abuse, and you don't stick a camera in his face because you'll find the cameras across the other side of the road." That has completely lost. How do you motivate an inexperienced section of officers? Is it recoverable? I want to support those officers as much as I possibly can. How the hell would you walk into an interview room and try to support a system where there's not enough of them, they're far too inexperienced, and the wrong sort of the public just completely abuse them because it's all on cameras now, which we never really had in the past, Steve. Where do you start with that, really? Seriously.
It's tough, and you've asked a really, really, really kind of powerful dynamic question there. How do you motivate a team? So that's a classic. Just take that one on its own. How do you motivate a team? If you add in all of those things, then you're going to have to, a bit like eating an elephant, dissect it first. You'll have to understand their individual motivations. Who are they? How well do you know them? What's your relation? What do you like as a role model in terms of role modeling behaviors, role modeling values? Are you the role model? Because that might not be the right dynamic if you're not. Some people say you
Yeah.
can't motivate individuals. You can only create an environment in which they feel motivated. So one of the tweets I put on my Twitter recently is a fantastic, very short clip by Simon Sinek, which talks about creating the right environment. So there's no easy answer to that, and it can't be done very quickly. But in terms of
you say that, one of the, sorry to interrupt, but you say that, that's so important. I found I desperately wanted the opportunity when I had a new person join the section. They're as suspicious of me as I am with them, and I always said, if you're fresh on response and you're brand new out the packet, you can't trust them until you know you can. You know, you've got to check their paperwork, is what I meant. I don't mean honesty or anything. I mean, you've got to check their paperwork, make sure it's actually up to standard. And with the ARVs, if you've been in for a certain amount of time, I needed to trust them until they'd proven that I couldn't. It was a sort of way. And it made them feel as though they could actually. And the other thing I wanted to get them, for them to get into a little bit of a problem. And as long as it wasn't neglectful, malicious in any way like that, the others would say he'll back you all the way, and we wouldn't move from this section because he'll back you all the way if it was well needed, well meant. It just went wrong. So he's on a pursuit. He's had a collision. He's now being stuck on for due care, perhaps. And I would back him all the way and show my support. Once I had done that, I had them. They were absolutely mine because they knew they could just flourish in their own little environment, knowing that they weren't going to get jumped on by their supervisory if things went wrong. And so creating that environment, I think Steve was just spot on that, absolutely spot on.
And you also
good job.
You touched on a couple of other topics there around when you arrived on a new section. So again, unraveling that, stepping back from that, there's a thing around how teams form. So forming, storming, norming, performing. These are the stages that teams go through in terms of dynamics. When you are promoted to Sergeant Inspector, there will be a change in the dynamic, and they have to build that trust up, and they have to say, will the environment be the same?
Yeah.
How long are we going to have to wait to see the colours of this individual in terms of how they behave? Can we trust this person, and how quickly does that trust spread amongst the section, or distrust? So, and you know it as well as I do, the unwritten rule of policing, but it's also a disciplined organisation, so people tend to kind of do that in kind of corridor conversations, and that's how it passes on. They don't do it in kind of indisciplined ways. So I think we're still on the topic of leadership here as well, and I'd probably spend depending on what individuals want to discuss, we could spend a whole lot of time, but we haven't moved off that Drucker's playlist yet. So I talked about the vision, but there's also your management, managing yourself, managing your team, which is what you're talking about, and managing your work, and then performance, effectiveness, results. And this is the real deep stuff that boards are interested in, your character. So your values.
Do you think they are, though? Is that true? Tell me, convince me of that.
Well, because your behaviours as a good operational cop, as a promotion candidate, generally people can see your behaviours in the workplace. They know all about it. So the way I kind of convey that in my guides is the old iceberg. You can generally only see about a seventh of an iceberg. That's the behaviours. Everybody can see the seventh. They can see that proportion above the surface. A promotion board is about going under the surface and say, well, that's where the substance exists. So let's ask some questions, which are what I would call introspective. Introspective questions. Why should anyone be led by you? Now that is I think Rob Goffey and Gareth Jones, who wrote the book of the same title, said that is probably the hardest question academically you can ever ask anyone. And in their research, they asked it to chief executives and silenced the room time and time and time again. So I use that very much as a question to say to people, why should anyone be led by you? And then I zip it.
Yeah.
And some people, I used to do it on an exercise on a piece of paper in a masterclass. And at the end of it, some people had written 2 sides of A4, and some people were still like reflecting and thinking about that, because it really does take some thought. And if you can answer that, and if you can't answer it, you're not ready for promotion yet.
No.
Now, why should anyone be led by you? The why bit, they've shown academically it's a tough question. I wouldn't particularly use why. I do give it as a tool. I would like to use more of the investigative questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. Because they're still introspective, and you can only go to yourself for the answers. And that's what boards do. They say very little, and then they shut their mouth, and you get the rest of the 6 minutes to talk. And hopefully in there, you will have done some research, a depth and breadth of research, so that, as you alluded to earlier on, you walk in and you think, well, I've only got 45 minutes. You're only going to ask me about 6 questions. So each one's going to be on each one of the competencies. I could have prepared for this. So I'll try and encourage people to go into their boards thinking, and I wouldn't suggest for a minute they say it, but thinking, which of you have got questions for my answers? Because you've already done the work. You just want to hear how it's going to manifest.
And that's, I remember that. I remember that. And I would think, come on, ask me one on this, ask me one on this. And they'd go, what do you think? And I would like, yes, right. You know, and it was like that all the way through. And you know, when you come out of the board and you go, the first one, I got an outstanding recommend to go, and I failed that. I'm probably the only officer ever still countrywide to fail an interview with an outstanding recommend, where it was you had initially. For the second time, I knew I'd done well. And it was really unusual, and it sounds arrogant to think that I knew I'd done well. I was so familiar with the subject, and I'd researched it, and I knew I'd done the right things. I knew they were a bit worried that I changed the way I phrased that. They were a bit worried that traffic were a little bit, well, we've always done it this way. This is what we're like. So I worked on youth support teams in Torbay. And I think that 6 or 8 weeks was probably worth more than 8 years on traffic. It was just for the board, that was. But, you know, it was good things. Right. What would you have done? No CID option for you, Steve Cooper. No CID, none of this business. What are you going to do instead in the police? What would you have done?
I probably would have been a dog handler. I would have applied to be a dog handler. One secret that I haven't told you, and I didn't give you when we had a chat earlier on, is I was a firearms officer in AFO for 4 years, between 1990 and 1994. But I didn't get any of the Gucci kit you got. I got a shoulder holster and a Smith & Wesson revolver. And
you were MP5s then?
I didn't have any of that. I was only given a Smith & Wesson revolver, and I was on Maggie Thatcher's conference at the ERC. So that's it. I don't mention it. It was a blip of an eye, but it was 4 years, because in those days you could be on CID and you could get called in for jobs depending on where you were. Just like they used to come around and knock you.
I did a bit of that. I remember. Did you have a pager then? You had the pager.
Yeah, the pagers, and you.
So did I.
And those were the.
So I was.
Yeah, Hutchinson Telecom it was at the time, if we're allowed to mention brands.
Oh my God! So blimey, who hasn't been AFO now? For goodness' sake!
I know.
Well, what a change! And that was when you used to get the call. You used to go to the station.
No, but I would have been a dog handler. I would have been a dog handler eventually, because they seem to be the ones having all the fun, and they seem to be the ones that were, to me, probably the happiest in their duties. You do your shit, you come in, and you get called.
What dog have you got at the moment, Steve?
I've got a West Highland Terrier.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, have you? Called?
Yeah, West Highland Terrier. She's called Tilly, but her actual pedigree name was Portia. But I think she's been born again and was Queen Nefertiti of Egypt once. She's definitely got an attitude. So.
See, I think she's a bit too posh for Arthur. That's for sure.
Yeah, sounds like it, doesn't
it? And we're doing this ask about face, but what made you join the police in the first place? Why did you think that's for me? Because you were in the Royal Marines.
Yeah.
And what made you join the police? Was it a natural flow? And do you think it's so easily done today? Because the wages as they are for things are not so good now, are they?
No, I mean the reason I joined the police was it was a logical step. So I decided I didn't want to continue in the Royal Marines beyond my 4 years, and there was a natural segue for me in terms of they were recruiting. Devon and Cornwall were recruiting. I was leaving in the December, and I joined Devon and Cornwall in the January 1987. So it was a natural segue for me. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed all the initial training. And I'd do it all again tomorrow, probably. That's the best recommendation I can make for policing. And I would definitely encourage anybody today to join policing, no matter all the ups and downs and the cynicism and the cynics. You can join it and leave.
Yeah.
But people don't join it as a vocation necessarily today. They do join it for 5 years, but it'll probably be the most challenging, developing 5 years, if you choose to do that, that you'll get. And you're delivering a public service as well.
You've said the right thing, because you said the thing that really echoes with me. I don't say, it gets harder and harder, because I keep seeing the police getting absolute battering in the media, and I know police officers all over the country, and they're at their wits' end. But you've got to hope for the better future. It's different. It's not necessarily better. Okay, well, secretly, every generation of cop thinks that their time was the best one, and they did before us, they will after us. It's different, and it might not be a vocation anymore. Things have changed. It's like a section. You've got your section, it's like, don't touch it, it's fine, it's perfect. It's, you'll have had the same with your CID guys, and then you get one in and it upsets the apple cart, but it sort of morphs into another section again, and it just ever changing. I think it's important to look at it that way.
And the other thing with that, Harry, is I've got 5 members of my family that are serving in the police at the moment, and so I'm kind of in touch with it, and I don't think any of them dislike it. They're all working hard, and some are response officers, and some are doing other roles. But I think it swings and roundabouts. Yes, the pay could be better for what they do. It swings and roundabouts, isn't it? But I think
11 years ago it was $2,000 more. for starters.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Adam, for you got saying a brilliant hour. Thank you very much, Steve. Lots of praise and thanks for that. Mick said, yes, you're quite right, dog handler was the best. Mick was a dog handler in the 18th century. I can say that because he's a very good friend of mine, and he's brilliant with his dog Ben. Really, really useful. Thank you very much. Stick around, won't you? That hour has flown by like we knew it would, and it's been great. Stick around for a minute, Steve, and thank you, everyone. See you next week. Have a good one.